Were Neanderthal types available for experiments? Question. Awareness said the Jehovah group came much later. When Jehovah created the Adam and Eve types with a reptile brain, were they experimenting with the Neanderthal types? What races already existed? Cosmic awareness. There were indeed the Neanderthal types available to the genetic exploration of those beings that took this on, those beings as the Anunnaki, once again, in association and assisted by the Syrians. They took these races and manipulated them, grafted on the reptilian/mammalian brain and created a species of Homo sapiens, or Cro-Magnon men. This eventually became Modem Man. These experimentations were done far greater back in time than 10,000 BC. And this is part of that which was known as the Jehovah group that this awareness has spoke of in previous times. Who created the yellow race? Question. If the red race came from the Atlans in Vega, the whites came from one place, the area of the blacks was being encroached on by reptoids, so someone brought them there. The brown race is a mixture of others. And the yellow race came up from Hollow Earth. Then who created the yellow race? If Jehovah only made the Semites from around 10,000 BC, why do all racial groups have a reptile brain with a mammal brain from the dolphins placed on top of that? Cosmic awareness. This does indeed go back into the genetic work done by Enki, as well as his Syrian colleagues. This goes back to the original human beings that were created, the Homo sapiens, the modern man that they were trying to create as a slave population to work in the mines of Africa and throughout the planet at that time. This precedes even the Atlantean race, and this core stem being was the being from which all other races eventually arose from, the yellow, red, the white and the black. It is correct that the red race stemmed from the Atlanteans. But even before Atlantis, this work was done to create the genetic template for humans, and this goes back several 100,000 years, so far back that it is difficult at this time to understand how far back in time this was. For it is beyond the comprehension of many who understand civilization started at 10,000 BC. When in truth, 300,000 years ago, there were these beings already on this planet, already starting to create the slave race that eventually became humanity in the various forms. The various races. It was the Anunnaki, through Enki and the Syrians who created the original Adam, Eve prototypes. All of this has been discussed very adequately in the books of Zecharia Sitchin that this awareness recommends to the readership. This awareness is complete with this question. Why do all racial groups have reptilian brains? Question. The last part of the question. If Jehovah only made the Semites from around 10,000 BC, why do all racial groups have a reptile brain with a mammal brain from the dolphins placed on top of that? Is there any particular reason for that? Cosmic awareness. The reason was due to the Syrian intervention. This was not the original goal. In the creation of a slave race it was understood that what would be preferred is a subspecies that did not have a highly developed capacity for thought, that would simply be followers, who would do what was commanded, without question, without thought. It was the Syrians who understood that this would not be something that they could be involved in. They chose to graft on the mammalian brain to the reptilian brain with the thought that eventually, at some point in human history and evolution, that which they were creating, the Homo sapiens being, would be able to think for itself. and be able to question and deny its more reptilian nature. The reptilian part of the brain was seen as that part which would make the following of orders, rigid regime, order, regularity, all of this as paramount to the slave beings that were being created. But as the Syrians understood it, this was not something that they could totally support, and with Inki's assistance and help, they secretly created a being that would have this potential at a later date because of the grafting of the reptilian to the mammalian. At first the mammalian was not supposed to be such a highly evolved brain or have such a capacity that the dolphin brain would have. But that is why this was done in secret, and against orders, if you will. Inki's transformation of humans into higher beings finally arrived. This created a being that in the beginning was subservient. Was the slave being, but with time started to go against the gods themselves until now a time has been reached. The evolutionary place has been reached that the Syrians and others of that which is now known as the Galactic Federation, once understood and saw as being the eventually outcome. That transformation of the original being into a higher conscious being, even eclipsing and exceeding the reptilians themselves, whose brains are not hotwired for such an evolutionary process, who will always have a tendency towards regimentation, order, hierarchical structure. There are reptilians who also have advanced, who have reached higher levels of consciousness themselves. But the main group of reptilians has this tendency to be devout followers and not necessarily high thinkers. But even within the reptilians there are different levels of consciousness, just as it is among Homo sapiens. The slave race, that they would follow their orders diligently, but still have a capacity to think things out, so that they were able to work out problems that needed a certain degree of intelligence to deal with, but there was a hidden agenda behind this also, that being that the eventual evolution of the Homo sapiens would bring it to a condition where it would exceed its original masters, and then even beyond that, would come finally to a point of spiritual evolution, of transformation to a higher consciousness and a higher conscious being. This awareness is complete,